Hey guys, so I'm here to talk about my first experience of being cancelled. Long story short, I was invited to this mini film festival hosted in Berlin, organized by the organization Sisters, who support women in the sex trade if they want to get out of prostitution, because there's a lack of such infrastructure in terms of what the German government will sponsor. Or if you go into one of the government-sponsored places, they'll gaslight you, talk about sex work, tell you that you won the wrong job, and that kind of stuff. So anyway, this organization does more than just help women. It's also out there to educate, raise awareness, so that someday it doesn't have to be, donor funded. Small NGOs doing that work, but we could actually have real meaningful state-funded support. As a lot of you can imagine, Berlin, of course, is like an uber liberal capital. This wouldn't necessarily happen to you in like every major German city. I've been to plenty of places where it was fine for me or other women with the same views to speak. But yeah, not in Berlin. There are 4 different movies being shown on different evenings, or we'll see if all of the event can still happen. The first movie is a documentary by women who are prostitution survivors, and then afterwards there's a panel of women who survived prostitution. The second one is about human trafficking, the fourth about child trafficking, and then the fourth one, which is the one where I would be speaking at the panel, is actually Pretty Woman. We're going to discuss Pretty Woman and then the romanticization and the myths in society about the sex trade, and just talk about what jobs are really like. That would be me, a prostitution survivor, and a social worker. So that's the event. That's what was planned. But the hosts, so the venue, was intimidated into kicking us out at the last minute because we were accused of every phobia under the sun. Obviously, swerfism, whorephobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, probably add a bunch more to that, fascism, Christian fundamentalism. I mean, these accusations don't really dignify a response. What's gross and upsetting is that the venue just took those people at their words and cancelled. I don't know if they were more scared of the protests that were promised, because in the past in Berlin, people have thrown glass bottles at abolitionists at demonstrations. So there have been like violent altercations before. I don't know if the venue was concerned about that, or they were just worried about losing their woke card. So giving a panel to prostitution survivors talking about how child trafficking, sex trafficking intersect with the legal sex trade, with the pimpless sex trade, and talking about how Johns are not like Richard Gere, that's apparently, hateful. And of course, advocating for the Nordic model. So instead, that venue will host an event to combat all our supposed isms, and I guess invite some people who are going to talk about how great the sex trade is and how the best way to deal with it is to just have as little regulation as possible, which is the current agenda of the global pro-industry or sex trade expansionist movement. Yeah, I can handle that this happened. I've been given many other platforms to speak on. I don't like platforms to speak on. This doesn't hurt me personally that much. But I think it's disgusting that people do this to prostitution survivors, because even if you disagree with them, how dare you tell a woman that she can't talk about her own life and the things that she witnessed in her own life and her own trauma? Like, that's just beyond. And this is the tip of the iceberg. Like, the harassment campaigns against prostitution survivors in Germany are vicious. That's because them speaking out is having an effect. It's changing a lot of people's minds. One of the founders of prostitution survivor movement, Hushka Mao, she just published her biography a few months ago. It's a bestseller. A lot of people are reading it. She's getting a lot of TV interviews, but with that comes a huge backlash, and it's like, people often say, like, why are you speaking about the sex trade? You're not a survivor. If you're interested, I have made a video about why I think prostitution is every woman's business. Every woman and girl gets to speak about it, even if she herself hasn't sold sex. It still affects all of us. But, even if I was a survivor, I wouldn't tell you. I wouldn't tell anyone, because the treatment that survivors get is worse than what I get. So people tell me things like, you haven't lived it, shut up. But they tell survivors that they're fake, that they're in it for the money, they're in it for the glory, they're in it for the book deals. They're so traumatized they can't see straight. If you were traumatized in prostitution, then that's just because you didn't screen your clients well enough and you're not made for this job. They get harassed by men. Would you still sell yourself to me at whatever price? And just straight up, you dirty whore, go back to where you came from. This is what you're good for. And it's so vicious that a lot of women do actually stop speaking out, and some decide, looking at that, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth my mental health. Like, I care about the women who come after me, the women and girls, I care, but I just can't do it. And some soldier on regardless, which, yeah, it's just a level of courage that few people have. The bright side to all of this is that the backlash wouldn't be this vicious if abolitionism in Germany wasn't growing and if these voices weren't really effective. But yeah, it's still disgusting. Like, it's just this attitude of, the people who disagree with me, they shouldn't even speak. Everyone who disagrees with me is Hitler. And someday, I promise you, you're going to have a view that matters to you, that someone else who happens to control the narrative at the time is going to call Hitler-esque, and then it's going to be you who can't speak on a panel, you who's going to have glass bottles thrown at them, you where people write to your boss trying to get you fired, trying to get you outed for whatever. I wouldn't do this. I mean, I might protest an event where pimps are speaking just to raise awareness, but I wouldn't dream of trying to cancel an event where women were talking about how much they like prostitution. Just make a counter event. Is that really the society you want to live in? No debate. People having different opinions is hate. My cancellation is not as grand and not as serious as other people's. I know people going through actual life-destroying cancellations right now for doing really sensible, really brave work. And this is mild in comparison, but it's also a little bit of a hint for what's in store when, we gain even more ground, we gain even bigger platforms. In full disclosure, I used to be one of those people who was like, there is no cancel culture. Every person who is canceled, they go on and then become this big person on TV, or they get a book deal or blah, or it's not real. It is real. I know a lot of people who don't speak on a lot of issues at their dinner table, in their friends groups, in public, because they can't afford it. A very small visible minority can make a career out of cancellation. For most people, it's just intensely stressful and limiting and potentially harmful in the long term. In my case, and thankfully because it's still at this sort of milder level, I mean, I do get messages from people who tell me I have blood on my hands and women in the sex street are being murdered because of women like myself, which I would never say to the other side. As much as I think their policies also endanger women, I'd never phrase it that way. This happening, this attempt of cancellation, so we are currently looking, the organizers are looking for a different venue. It might take place, it might not. They were able to show the other 3 films, thankfully, but they might have to cancel the final one where I'd be participating. That might happen. Thankfully, not only can I handle it, it makes me just more determined to speak out. You're going to tell me to be quiet, I'm going to start screaming. And of course, the more of us there are who are saying prostitution is not work, prostitution is exploitation, Johns are not clients, pimps are not managers, this is not a trade like any other, this is commercial sexual exploitation, this is sexual boundaries subject to market forces, this violates consent, this violates human rights, this violates basically every value, especially every woke value. The more of us there are, the easier it gets for other people to speak out and join. And this is a small setback in overall, the German abolitionist movement has made really big progress. And I think there's a chance of a Nordic model style legislation happening in my lifetime, possibly within the next 10-20 years. And it's more a question of how bad does climate change get? Is there going to be a war in Europe? Is there something that's going to distract us massively from this? Because, we know when crisis happens, women's projects, women's needs, women's rights do in many ways just go to the back burner. even though all these crises always aggravate crimes against women and girls. Yeah, well, that's not the depressing note I wanted to end on. If you guys like, I'm gonna do more of these like small updates about things that are happening, things in the news, things that I'm doing. I also want to do these short videos of just going through common myths and arguments around prostitution and just keep things hopefully under 10 minutes. And people on Twitter have already sent in a lot of really good suggestions on what I could talk about. If there's like a particular myth or statement or something you'd like me to respond to that you think is worthwhile in this kind of format, let me know, leave it down below, and maybe I'll get to it. I hope I will. These videos are obviously easier to make, less research, less work. I'm also gonna try and keep doing video essays, but yeah, I do this in my free time, and like I have to work and study and have a life, so we'll see how much I'll get around to, but if there's a response, I'll do more, because I know it's echoing out there in the world and is worth the effort. Thanks for listening, guys.